we can cross live to former U.S. Army captain and Congressman Michael Flanagan and journalist and Middle East commentator Rania Khalek. Thank you very much both for being with us here on RT International. Michael, I'd like to start with you.
Happy to be.
Donald Trump says that this was a retaliation against Assad's use of chemical weapons, but we've actually seen no evidence to back this up. Do you think that the U.S. action in this case is justified or a little bit premature?
I think the action had to be quick. It had to be swift. The administration spent the day today briefing Capitol Hill and near-in partners in Europe and elsewhere, and I think as days go by, that proof will come forward. The Hill has been completely read in on this, and I think that there's almost universal support for the action of the president in this limited fashion.
Now, Rania, the U.S. attack on Syria was not authorized by the United Nations or even the U.S. Congress. Was this an illegal act of war, as the Syrian government is claiming?
Well, what's really stunning about this is that this is based on an attack in Idlib where there has been no investigation into what actually happened and no evidence. I mean, even Staffan de Mistura, the UN representative to Syria, the special envoy to Syria, said that there has been no confirmation of exactly what happened in Idlib during that attack. And so the fact that that was used as a pretext to go ahead and bomb a Syrian airbase is one of the most stunning aspects of this, because you're basically bombing Syria based on nothing more than claims from one side of a multi-sided war.
Now, Michael, there is kind of a history of Congress kind of staying quiet on this. In fact, Barack Obama went to Congress before to go and try and get approval to attack Syria. Donald Trump did not seek approval from Congress before launching these airstrikes against Assad. Do you think Congress has a role to play here?
Well, Congress certainly has a role to play, but the timing of which differs enormously. Barack Obama came to Congress and looked for a plenary permission to behave any way he thought reasonable in Syria. Congress was unwilling to give him that permission. When the red line was crossed, he didn't come back to Congress. Instead, he said, we'll handle this diplomatically and rely upon our partners in the region to solve Assad's chemical weapon problem. That didn't happen. Congress has something called the War Powers Act in this country, and the War Powers Act permits the president to have certain exercise of certain military capacities, which goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson's undeclared war, if you want to use that term, against the Barbary pirates. The War Powers Act came in after Vietnam, which was a very long, undeclared war, and Congress says you got 60 days to stop or read us in and obtain our permission. And so we're on day 2. But as I said, the administration was at the Hill today, briefing Congress, briefing the senators, briefing the members on what happened, and if there is to be more action, and that is not at all certain, that I'm sure that Congress will be completely read in, and more than that, permission will be sought, and I think that'll be perfectly appropriate, and I think everyone's satisfied with that.
Now, Rania, the U.S. launched these airstrikes, or rather strikes, after proposing a coalition to force President Bashar al-Assad from power, which was a quick reversal of their previous position mentioned earlier, even in the same day. Assad doesn't have many allies left. Can he survive all this?
Well, it's not even about whether Assad will survive all this. What's taken place right now is that you have a complete reversal, right, of what the administration said just a few days ago about what their priority in Syria is. Now, regardless of what you think about the Syrian government and what they've done throughout this war, the reality and the facts of the ground are this: that there's the Syrian government and the Syrian army on one side, and on the other side are a patchwork of rebel groups which are linked to Al-Qaeda, and in which cases are actually Al-Qaeda or ISIS, that are fighting against the government. So by the U.S. bombing the Syrian government and Syrian government forces at this point, they are by default helping ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Yesterday, after the Trump administration bombed that airbase, what you had afterwards was almost immediately ISIS capitalized on that attack and launched offensive operations against the Syrian army around Homs. So that's one of the most stunning aspects of this, is that that the U.S. is essentially, by doing this, acting as air cover for ISIS. Now, I imagine it was just a symbolic gesture that's not going to escalate any more than this. But if it were to, if you were to remove the Syrian government from power right now, what you would have is the country being taken over by Salafi jihadist groups.
Michael, I
don't think anyone is going to. I'm sorry if I can have just a minute of your
Please,
time.
feel
I
free.
apologize.
Go ahead.
There's no one in the Trump administration that wants ISIS to succeed, and to suggest so is irresponsible. The use of chemical weapons and weapons of mass destruction.
Well, it doesn't matter what they want. What they want doesn't matter.
Let me finish. I listened quietly while you talked endlessly. Now you can give me a minute, just out of pure politeness. The Assad regime has used chemical weapons and weapons of mass destruction. This is a complete escalation, even over the horror of barrel bombs and other things that it has used on its own people throughout the last, certainly since the Arab Spring and before. There are millions and millions of international refugees and at least 500,000 dead in Syria, only a small portion of which can be attributed to al-Qaeda and to ISIS, as horrible as they are. There are millions of people in diaspora from Syria in the world from Assad, not from the terrorists. The man is a danger to his own people, and up until now, the Russians have been permitted hegemony in this area, and the world has said, okay, the Russians will kind of hold the leash and handle this, and we've all been very patient, and we still will be patient with this. But chemical weapons cross the line. We have to step in on this, and that's what the Trump administration did.
Now, just to push back a little bit, no one has proven, actually, including the UN, that Assad and his regime did use the chemical weapons. I mean, that investigation, we know that chemicals were used, but we don't know exactly where they came from. That investigation hasn't actually taken place.
That's a fair statement, but let us understand, though, that you and we don't know, but I think it is known, and that proof will come forward here very soon.
All right, so...
that doesn't make sense what you just said. That doesn't make sense what you just said. There hasn't been an investigation. I want to see a scientific process determining what actually took place in Idlib. And one of the reasons that it's hard to determine what took place in Idlib is because the people that control Idlib right now are a bunch of different groups that are either al-Qaeda or have ideologies that are identical to al-Qaeda's, like Ahrar al-Sham, that have literally banned music in Idlib. I'd love to ask the other guest, does he know who's in charge in Idlib? Because it is groups that ask, I'd love to know, does he know what they've done to Christians in Idlib? That the fact that they've chased Christians out of Idlib and ransomed and kidnapped and executed many of them, or what they've done to the Druze minority in Idlib. They have not only chased them out, they've also forcibly converted them at the threat of death. So these are the people that control Idlib right now, and that is the alternative to Assad right now. That is No, but I mean, if you're going to talk about this, look, no one's sitting here defending everything the Syrian government has done. But two things. One, there hasn't been an investigation to determine who carried out this attack in Idlib. The only sources of information on the ground in Idlib are people who are basically, every piece of information that comes out of there is controlled by the rebel groups that are in charge.
There's much more to the operation.
So you can't actually...
Yes, there's much more to the operation than
I let you finish, so let me finish real quick. Hold on. You're welcome to just let me finish really quickly.
I'm at your disposal.
Okay. Well, the groups that are in control of Idlib control all of the information that comes out of Idlib. And the problem with Syria is that the information that comes out of both sides, we don't know what's actually happening on the ground. So it all should be treated, whether it's from the government or from the opposition, should be treated with a great deal of skepticism. And the other issue when it concerns this right now is the fact that the rebels, and we know this, the rebels have had access to chemical weapons as well. So it's unclear what actually took place. And to base these strikes that took place recently on basically one claims from one side of this situation is wrong-headed.
The rebels don't have air, neither does ISIS. We know where they were loaded. We know what kind of plane they were loaded in, and the airbase was hit because that was the departure point for the weapons that were loaded. As I said, the facts of this, will come forth in the next few days and shared with the UN and with the others. There is no one in the world who has seen these, any of the foreign ambassadors, any on the left in the United States, who objects to this mission because because it's unproven. Everyone is satisfied that what has happened by Assad on the 4th, I think it was, did happen by him, and the only thing that is in mild disagreement is the level to which the response to that has come.
Now, Michael, again, I do have to stress, even the UN says that there is no proof at this point that the chemicals came from the air, but I do want to say Dmitry Medvedev, Russia's prime minister, has said that Trump's actions have pushed the U.S. to the brink of military confrontation with Russia. Does that worry you that the U.S. and Russia could actually be going head-to-head on this?
Yeah, well, we want to be partners with Russia, and I think that's clear. I think the Trump administration really wants to do that, which is why we have not pressed Assad from day one of the Trump administration, and we had no intention of doing it now, but for the use of chemical weapons. We have no other reason to be there. We have no existential reason to get rid of Assad other than the fact that he's a brutal murderer, but there are lots of brutal murderers in the world, and he's in the Russian sphere. But the Russians let him out of hand with this chemical weapon attack, which the Russians have explained are some, I think they said that there's some capacity that he's developed since they helped get rid of the weapons with the Obama administration deal some years ago. I don't know what the truth of that is, but the Assad had to be replied to by the world. The United States took on that task. And I don't think that this is going to go beyond that. This is not the opening salvo in a long campaign, and this is not even an opening salvo in a long campaign to get rid of Assad. We're now just floating the discussion out loud, hoping that our Russian friends will hear it, and they have actually signaled back saying that the future of Syria is not dependent on the future of Assad, that they're not committed to that in an AP interview yesterday. So I think there's a very real politic view of this coming forward, and I think it's very healthy. The Russians have a lot of angry things to say now, and appropriately so, and this is how diplomacy works. But Tillerson is still traveling to Moscow next week. That meeting hasn't been canceled, isn't going to be canceled, and I think that we're all going to get along much better in the near future.
All right, Rania, I saw you shaking your head a little bit there. We do know that Nikki Haley has said that the U.S. is prepared to do more. And so we're kind of getting some conflicting information as to whether this is a limited action or if the U.S. is kind of ramping up. We know Rex Tillerson is on his way here to meet with Moscow, yet Moscow has closed those channels of communication. Sticking with the UN, the Bolivian envoy, Rania...
Well, I think what Moscow closed, if you'll...
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
I'm sorry, just a quick correction. I think Moscow closed off the ability to deconflict military operations. I don't think that they've shut down discussions between Moscow and Washington.
Fair enough, fair enough. Rania, what about the Bolivian envoy to the United Nations has said that the U.S. attack will hinder the investigation into the alleged chemical attack in Idlib. Do you think that this is the case? Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that it's almost impossible to do an investigation in Idlib because any human rights workers or UN workers, or for the most part journalists who enter places that are under the control of the rebel groups that are in charge in Idlib end up getting killed. So it's really difficult to even be on the ground in these areas and determine what happened. So I don't even know if the U.S. could hinder that because the groups that are in charge are the ones that hinder any sort of independent investigation taking place. That said, I really think that the U.S. has very few options in Syria. The U.S. has very little leverage in Syria because every scenario of escalation, if the U.S. were to escalate, as it has threatened to do, would end up in a possible war with Russia. And I can't imagine that anybody in the Trump administration or any administration at this point would want to get into some sort of hot conflict where you're directly, you Americans and Russians are killing each other, which is what this would lead to if the U.S. were to go harder in Syria.
Well, Michael, what about the argument that, some Syrian officials have said the U.S. actions will play into the hands of Islamic State and other terrorists? If we even take Russia out of this equation, the Kremlin has echoed this stance. Do you agree that this could help Islamic State, or it could embolden their position and help them in recruiting more fighters into the area?
Turkey has heartily approved of this action, as has Jordan and Egypt. These are folks who are very well vested in the destruction of ISIS in their neighborhood. And they think that this was a profitable and wise thing to do at this moment. So there's a lot of thoughtful opinion against that being true. ISIS had a dust-up and moved out. Well, okay, they're going to do that from time to time. Maybe it was to take advantage of some weaknesses in Assad, perhaps. I don't know.
Hang on a second.
But I do know this,
Did you see that Turkey has an investment in destroying ISIS? Did you see that Turkey has an investment? I mean, Turkey opened its border. The reason ISIS is in Syria.
Can I finish my? I don't want to wish to make the discussion on the level of your level of understanding. The Turks are waist deep in destroying ISIS. They have absolutely committed to it. I'm sorry you think that's a joke, but they're working with the Russians on this matter. Much to everyone's surprise, these historical enemies working together for the destruction of ISIS. So I think that they're all approving of this, except for the Iranians and the Russians to some extent. I think the Russians will view this as an incident that has come and gone and a damage to our future ability to work together, but I think we'll overcome it, and I think Tillerson will have a very good meeting next week.
All right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Very interesting to hear your thoughts. Former U.S. Army Captain and Congressman Michael Flanagan and journalist and Middle East commentator Rania Khalek, thanks for being with us here on RT International. You know, it's a mess there that no one can debate that fact, and we appreciate hearing both of your points of view on this here on RT International.